Hi guys, this is Anne Marie, and today I'm gonna fake it till I make it with fake number 2. Before I dive in, I do want to say welcome to the new faces that have arrived recently. I'm not gonna lie, it's been totally exciting to me, so thank you for being here. If you're interested in any of the other Fake It Till You Make It series videos, those are all together in a playlist on my channel, which I will link here and in the description box below. All right, let's get started. Today for fake number 2, I will be recreating the Thickers alphabet from Paige Evans' Blooming Wild collection. Little disclaimer, my alphabet is flatter than a thicker. I could have made it more like a thicker. I could have cut chipboard since I was using a steel rule die. And if you want thicker letters, that's something you should consider, either chipboard or layers of stacked cardstock if you're using a thinner die, or you can experiment with fun foam, which one of my friends on the message board that's having the challenge that inspired all this, she did, and she had excellent results. All right, so first off though, I just wanted to kind of create it with cardstock so that it was a little more versatile because I'm just not committed to using all of it, right? And since I'm making it DIY, that would have been a whole additional pass through my machine. And I'm already going to be making a lot of passes through my machine. So I just went with cardstock. First off, I looked through my stash to see what I had that would best mimic the font and size of the original Thickers. So I have quite a few dies that are a little smaller and then a couple that are larger. I ended up selecting this older steel rule die by Cirque. They're like OG, I think, or one of their OGs, Shadow Box Alphabet. This is a steel rule die. It is a little larger than the Thickers. So, just consider what you're comfortable with on your projects when you're choosing this part. I like to use steel rule dies when I'm doing a larger project like this because they are a little more efficient because I can cut through so many layers at once. After I selected my font, I looked again at the original set of Thickers to see what colors I was going to need. I could see I was going to need 2 tones each of red, pink, yellow, green, teal, and blue. Next, I pulled out the 3 most colorful papers from my knockoff kit, these 2 floral and the rainbow. They were my guide papers I had used when I built my kit to make sure that my papers matched as I went. And so here I just use them in the same way. I pulled out all my cardstock in this kind of range, and then I compared my selections to those papers to help me narrow it down and make my final decisions. And then that ensures that all the tints and shades will play nicely together in my final projects. One more disclaimer. I didn't use the most efficient process, in part because I learn as I go. I'm kind of a messy creator. I just dive in and I figure it out as I'm getting my hands dirty. Also, though, I chose to recreate the entire Thickers set. That's a lot of letters. And if, you're like me, you have a lot of letters left over in your Thickers, or you get down to like random ones and you have to Frankenstein letters, or you give up and pitch them after you use them for like so many titles or something. So if you're more organized than I am, you might plan ahead very specifically to the layouts you want to create so you know what titles you're going to want, and then you can create your custom titles to mimic this. However, half the reason I love doing something like this, kind of doing a knockoff of an original thing that's out there, I kind of like it because it's problem solving. It's just another type of creativity. I have to figure out how can I kind of get the same result with what I already have on hand, and I really like that challenge. And I also kind of like the aesthetic sense of it in the end for it to really match the original as much as possible as far as presentation, etc. So I decided I went all the way. I made every single letter, mostly. There's a couple I skipped. And I arranged them on my sheets the same way, everything in the same order, in the same color, as much as I could. So that definitely is not the most efficient, but for me, it was the most fun. All right, so to that end, I wanted to know exactly how many of each letter I was going to need to mimic that original set and in what colors. So I went through and I just made a list for each of the color combos. So like lavender blue, I need these letters, etc. I chose to work by letter because in my head it was going to make more sense for me to cut all of my A's at once and then just be done with that die completely. But it might make more sense to you to cut by color combo. So you do you, follow your heart, find the path that is meant for you, okay? This is just what worked for me. Finally, it was time to start die cutting. I'm going to die cut a pair of the same letter, but in a different color. So I, paired up these selections, kind of a dark and a paler version of each. I'm going to cut a letter out of both, but trim down one and stack to create this two-toned color block alphabet. And like I said, I learned by doing, so I had to just jump in and really get a feel for the process first. And so I started by using one die to cut two pieces of cardstock. Now that meant I was only making one letter with one pass of my machine. And that was just going to make like so many runs through my die cutting machine. So I eventually gained confidence in the process and I moved up to cutting 4 layers for each of 3 dies at a time because that's what would fit on my plate. So that allowed me to cut enough for 6 letters in one pass. And so that did increase the efficiency of the die cutting. I think I could have saved myself even more time if I would have pre-cut all of my cardstock down into, say, 2 by 2 inch squares. So learn from my mistakes if you do decide to try this. I realized early on that I was probably going to run out of some of these colors. So I selected the letters that I worked on strategically, but also kind of bizarrely. So I wasn't going to end up with all of like the best color combos in the beginning and middle and then have only weird ones at the end. Because, there's still some important letters down there at the end, right? All those T's and U's and Y's. So I started with A, and then I chose a letter near the end to cut next. I chose a letter somewhere in the middle, like M or N, to cut next. And then I just kind of continued selecting a letter from the middle of whatever section was left until I'd covered the whole alphabet. After I die cut the letters, I chose one to trim down, and then I glued it on top of the base letter. I often chose to cut whatever color appeared kind of the smallest on the finished letter. So like on that A, that kind of left-hand bar, that's the one I would cut and then glue that on top of a complete letter that was in the more dominant color. But I did kind of play with this, depending on if I nicked a letter due to poor placement when I ran it through the die cut machine, or maybe the sturdiness of the paper was different, and so it made more sense to cut the thinner paper. Or sometimes I just wasn't paying close attention. I just cut one and I just used whichever one I cut. I did choose to use a wet glue that gave me a little bit of play so I could get the placement just right. And it felt a lot quicker and cheaper than using Xyron, which if I were building a title, I probably would have chosen to use my Xyron for that more complete adhesive coverage. After I assembled them, I went through my fine tip markers. I selected one color for each of the letter combinations or each of the color combinations. And so to do that, I glued some scraps together of all the combos I had, and I practiced all the different stitch marks from the original in different pens until I found the one I liked. They used zigzag, straight, and cross stitches, all of which are easy to doodle, so this was easy to do. Most of the stitches crossed from one color to another, so they kind of were on that border of the two colors, kind of implying that they're sewn together. If you do this, I recommend using the very finest tip pen you can find. That's really the best idea so that you're avoiding a little gap sometimes in the color. You can tell when I used my felt tip markers, there would sometimes be a skip at the border, but the ultra fine tip Sharpies are not doing that. They were really smooth. All right, we're almost done. To finish off, I took an old overhead transparency. You could use old plastic packaging or really any cardstock. I ran a strip of adhesive down it in a row with my ATG, and then I stuck the letters down. And then I was watching TV while I did this, and I totally got sucked into a show, and I literally didn't mind my P's and Q's. I got to the end and I still had a stack of P's and Q's to assemble and cut and everything. So that's why those are stuck down at the end. In my back pocket, I'm kind of considering I might cover these with vellum if I feel they're a bit too loud for the layout, since the original thicker set has kind of a hazy, dusty feel to the coloring. I also could have easily duped the other alphabet with the same shadow box letters. They would have been smaller than the original ones in that case. But since the shadow box dies included backing shadows, I could just cut letters from pattern paper, from scraps from the kit, and then I could cut the shadows from white cardstock and get a similar outline effect. So I'm going to also keep that kind of in the back of my mind as I start working on my actual projects. All right, everyone, that's the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing or clicking the thumbs up. I will be back on Monday with one final Fake It Till You Make It for the Blooming Wild collection, and then we will start scrapping with it. Have a scrappy, happy weekend. Bye.